Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a West Coast show that packs a punch. Well, occasionally packs a punch locally, provincially, nationally, internationally. I'm Robin Adair, and speaking about a man with a big punch is my co-host with the most across in his Saanich lair, the Croatian sensation himself, John Jurisic. And John, so much going on as we say goodbye to former Premier John Horgan.
You know, Robin, this is a big BC event, and you and I have been involved watching, commenting, involved directly in politics for better part of 40 years. It's very sad to see John Horgan depart. That is quite an institution leaving BC politics. And he's leaving at the top of his game, isn't he, politically? And now clearly it's time to look after himself and his family after, unfortunately, a second brush with cancer. He sounds very upbeat as he leaves the legislature and his MLA seat, that being Langford Wandafuka. He says he's open to a job with the Canucks, maybe an ambassador's role somewhere. If he receives a call from the Prime Minister, we certainly wish John all the best, don't we?
Absolutely, John. And I have some thoughts on why John Horgan has been so successful as a premier in BC. It's a tough game. A lot of people have held this job. Doesn't matter what political party. Not many can say they've walked away with a high approval rating. So here's what I was thinking about with John Horgan and why he's been so successful. Let's start with the timing. He had the good fortune of getting in against Christy Clark at the end of a long Liberal mandate, and he managed to win that barely. In fact, he won it with a minority government and the Green Party holding the balance of power, but he did win. And then he decides he can sniff the tea leaves. He's got Andrew Wilkinson in as the leader of the Liberals. He calls a snap election out of the blue during a pandemic. That might have rebounded, but it didn't seem to. He won an overwhelming majority in that case, and that just led to more confidence for John Horgan. So how did he keep up this momentum? Well, he has managed to avoid pitfalls and has not become a doctrinaire advocate of any political stripe. He is not what you would call a partisan politician. Many NDPers wanted him to cancel the Site C dam. This is one example. He examined it. He said, we've spent far too much money on it. It's still under construction. It was the right decision. Also, NDP is very unhappy about pipelines. They didn't like the LNG pipeline going to Kitimat. They didn't like the expansion of the oil pipeline with bitumen that's heading down to Port Moody. They wanted that stopped as well. He said he would stop it in the courts. He'd use every tool in his toolbox. And I think he always knew they didn't have a lot to stand on. They didn't succeed in the courts, and he walked away. He's left it, also the right decision. And then, of course, we have the largest crisis in the history of probably our lifetime and the history of healthcare in the world, and that was the pandemic. So what does John Horgan do? Well, he steps back. He allows his chief medical officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, to step forward and lead the charge in terms of vaccinations and masks and other safety measures. Adrian Dix, the health minister, gets to step in, and he also very capably works with the health authority to do something about calming the waters and getting British Columbians on side. John Horgan steps in only when he's needed, but he is willing to step back and let this process happen. And there have been missteps. For example, the Royal BC Museum, they were going to tear it down, replace it with a new museum. And it was going to take 10 years. It was going to cost $1 billion. And people in the province said, what? No way. People were furious. And John Horgan listened. And John Horgan stepped back. And now it's not happening. The museum's still a mess. But as he walks away, he is not being tagged with that. So what's the message here for David Eby as John Horgan takes his walk off the stage? It's lead for everyone. Don't lead for a narrow group. Don't lead by ideology. Lead because you're doing what you believe is the right thing, and don't follow narrow objectives. John Horgan has now, I believe, clearly demonstrated the template for a modern politician.
What a wonderful tribute, Robin. I couldn't agree more. You and I certainly are not big supporters of this government and their policies. Happy to take shots when we feel they're needed. And in fact, happy to take shots anywhere where they're needed. But John Horgan has been a political rock star and deserves a thumbs up from the Victoria Rumble Room. You know, others should really be paying attention, like federal conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He sometimes sounds like he's campaigning for a very narrow right-wing audience. And if he ever plans on beating Justin Trudeau's Liberals, needs to broaden his base, not play directly to it.
Couldn't agree more, John. And I believe that Pierre Poilievre is actually listening to that message. I believe he's starting to move more to the center. He's sort of wrapped up this rally around people that are unhappy with the vaccinations and the mandates, and he's now moving towards mainstream Canadians. He's talking a lot about this catch and release system with our prisons and with people on the streets, the addicts and the mentally ill. He's saying more institutions are needed. It's not simply finding housing. We have to have a lot of other services, and people are responding to that. When it comes to oil and gas, he's saying, fine, we do need to move towards cleaner energy, but we can't do this overnight. We can't destroy these important industries. We can't flatten Alberta overnight because we're going to take away oil and gas production, or British Columbia for that matter. And I think Canadians are responding to that as well, that it has to be done in measured steps. And Poilievre is even saying, that it's time to take a hard look at what the nuclear options might be, and says that, this form of power, and it has had its problems in the past, is still perhaps the best way forward for us in the future.
This is something we have to be very clear about. There is no carbon-free future without nuclear power. That's just a physical and mathematical fact. And because there's no other source that can meet the needs of our civilization. So we have to use clean, safe nuclear power, the way Ontario has been doing, the way France has been doing for decades now. And we can do it. We have to do it.
And now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room once again is one of our fave guests, Professor Andrew Weaver from the University of Victoria. Although I should mention he's not at the University of Victoria this very moment. He's joining us in his palatial home office. And we're all in our home offices, so we're on even playing field here. Great to have you back on the show, Andrew.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to talk about the environment, which is great. That's right up your alley. And I saw something on the screen on CNN, and I thought, well, how come I'm just seeing this on a banner on a screen? Why aren't they trumpeting this? This is big news. And it said, at least I believe it said, that the ozone is actually repairing itself. Is this true?
That's a remarkable story, actually. Yes, it is true. What is most important about that is you just identified the critical problem. Is we have one of the biggest successes of international public policy and science feeding into that decision-making process. That is the ozone hole. What you are seeing is actually new reports that, in fact, the ozone hole is repairing itself. Within a few decades, should be back to normal. And why that is important is back in the early 70s and so forth, there was a really a growing concern as scientists started to observe that the ozone, which is very important for blocking high energy solar radiation from hitting us and causing skin cancer, for example, was depleting because of things known as chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs. These are the repellents in spray cans or the coolants in your fridges. And so the international treaty came out through the Vienna Convention and then the Montreal Protocol, which led to the banning of CFCs. And in fact, they did ban them. And in fact, it worked. And in fact, the world came together and solved this problem. I teach a course at UVIC called Climate and Society, and I spent about 10 minutes on this, going over this success. And one of the things pointed out was, why are we not letting everybody know that we can do that, right? That when the world comes together, we can solve these international crises. It was but we don't. I'm sorry, Robin. I know this is a media. I know you come from that area, but strikes me that if there was a negative story, we'd have frontline news. But this is an incredible positive news story, and it's kind of on the obituaries in the back page, right? So,
Andrew, so great to have you back. Okay.
Yeah, you started off by getting me going, my friends.
Well, you are one of our favorite rumblers. Okay. Thank you for coming back on. I'm sure we're going to have now our increasingly massive viewers get pretty excited about the stuff that you are talking about. So here's another one. We just ran a clip of conservative leader Pierre Poilievre saying that nuclear power needs to be a big part of Canada's energy future. I know a lot of people are nervous about this. They don't understand it. Nonetheless, we think, or we've been told, there's new technology which could make nuclear power a lot safer. Give us the straight goods, Andrew.
Okay, the straight goods. I wish Pierre Poilievre just kept his mouth shut, because he was also telling the world that we all should invest in cryptocurrency minutes before or days before a complete global collapse of cryptocurrency. So the problem here is I'm not sure he knows what he's talking about. But so there's two parallel stories here, and it's not as simple as, you know, a lifetime politician standing up and decreeing a solution to climate change, suddenly having the answer. Like, for heaven's sake, people, you know, there's just so much nonsense coming from Mr. Poilievre. But with that said, and this is the Rumble Room, there's an element, an underlying element of truth to what he said, is that if we go back to the history of nuclear power, really research and development in that area stopped after things like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, which were Cold War era nuclear reactors that had, in case of 3 Mile Island, leaks, in the case of Chernobyl, meltdown. Canada has a different type of technology with the CANDU reactors, which have been quite safe for really used for quite some time. But there is newer technology emerging where, in fact, we don't need to have the type of waste hanging around for the same length of time, because, of course, nuclear waste is really nothing more than wasted energy. It's inefficient energy because it's slowly decaying. So there is a lot of R&D happening in the nuclear field. There is some potential, particularly for jurisdictions that are fastly growing, like China and India, that there may be a role for it. But what's really exciting that's going on right now is that we've had, for the first time, announcement that we've got fusion working. And this is actually is that we had some recent announcements coming out that there was you know, an awful lot of energy going in, but an awful lot of energy plus a little bit more coming out in fusion. Now, the difference between fusion and fission, of course, is in fission, that's nuclear reactors, you split the atom and get the energy. In fusion, you're bringing them together and getting the energy. So there's the difference here too is that fusion doesn't have radioactive waste, whereas nuclear does. And that's really exciting, because we have a company in BC that's one of the world leaders in that. It's called General Fusion. It's based in Vancouver. And they're also on the cutting edge of this technology, which is, I don't think I even want to predict how many years away it is. Because if somebody says decades away, I'll say, no, I don't believe that. If someone says tomorrow, I don't believe that. It's not too far away, in my view, because it's a little bit like, look at the laptop computer, look at the LED screen, look at the electric car. Once we start to crack the key problem, things start to take off really fast. But many of our younger millennials today will have no record of this. And it's frankly interesting teaching all through this entire period to see the generations of students coming and to see how their awareness of issues that people know about the ozone hole, but they don't really know about it. And in my class of 140 people, very few actually had heard that news that you had seen as a banner on the bottom of the screen on CNN flashing by for about 30 seconds.
It's remarkable, you know, and you're absolutely right. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's a negative story, you see protesters being hauled off in Germany. Even just this last week, there was a protest. And my observation of it, I do have another question for you, but the observation I have is that the protesters aren't talking about all the things you've just mentioned either, though. They're not saying we got to turn to nuclear power, we got to turn to this new technology, all this stuff is breaking through, which would be a positive. It's more regressive. We got to stop driving cars, we've got to stop factories, we've got to stop doing everything we're doing and ride bicycles. And I think riding bicycles is a very healthy thing, but I don't see the whole society moving towards that. So,
Well, I can tell you, Robin, there I'm getting a knee replacement in a couple of months. I've got my date already, and riding a bicycle is really, frankly, not an option for me right now, and it hasn't been an option for quite some time. I know I could ride an electric bike, but no, I couldn't because I can't really pedal properly because I can barely walk right now. But that's going to be a thing of the past.
well, we'll do a show on that. But
Yeah,
Hey, you should come in live and watch my knee being torn apart and watch the orthopedic surgeon go,
Yeah.
what the hell is going on here? Because it is such a disaster.
The Rumble Room live from Victoria General with Andrew
I think
Weaver.
there'd be a lot of our viewers would be very happy seeing you hobbling around. But
I can't catch up to them.
Right.
And they can catch up to me.
But I'm going to put on my tin hat conspiracy theory here, okay?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, here we go. So we're going to shift a little bit now. Well, not shift entirely. We've had Ellis Ross, the former Haisla chief, who's now the MLA for Skeena, talk about the benefits to his community that the new LNG plant in Kitimat will bring. Looks like the plant is close to production. You've referenced this already, that it's a little bit overdue. Now there's the issue of power, and BC Hydro actually hasn't installed new power lines needed for the project. Has this okay, my tin hat is on. Has this happened because there's some government folks that didn't really think this LNG facility would ever be completed or don't want it completed?
So here's the thing. There's a lot of, now we're going to enter the political spin realm. So what is going on is when LNG Canada got permits for their facility there, they had 2 phases that were permitted. They only made a final investment decision on the first phase, which is what's being built. There was no final investment decision on the second phase, although there was permitting. When I was in the legislature and we negotiated Clean BC, and I was livid about the giveaways for LNG, and I threatened to pull government down over this because, as a climate scientist, I'm not running for like taking 8 years out of my life at the peak of my career to be like a champion for LNG. Are you kidding me? Anyway, I threatened. It was more than a threat. I was willing to do it. I'd have to get the support of one of my colleagues to do that because we needed 2 votes to pull government down. But we started to work on this Clean BC. I was told in no uncertain terms that any phase 2 would have to be subject to the new greenhouse gas legislation in BC, which means that phase 2 can never happen. So because and LNG Canada would know that. And so what I think we're seeing now is LNG Canada wanting to move forward with phase 2. And I see BC saying, well, you knew that phase 2, if you made a final investment decision, would have been subject to this, the new greenhouse gas rules. And LNG Canada never decided to use electricity in their compression. They went all in on a natural gas compression in phase 1. That was always their intention. So to somehow pretend that the government didn't build a line is frankly not true, because the phase 1 final investment decision was never predicated on electricity because they had no intention of using. This is one of the things that I was pointing out. Makes no bloody sense. You're burning natural gas to compress natural gas to ship it halfway across the world to burn it again.
A big pulp and paper plant is closed in Prince George. It seems like the government's answer to that is, well, we're going to put in some programs to get people retrained, which is not a good sign for what used to be our largest industry. In the Green Party, we see Sonia Furstenau going out and meeting with these people and sounding very supportive of the environmentalists, which is, the Green Party has that reputation of being very pro-environment. Does that mean you are anti-industry and anti-forestry?
So I have nothing to do with the BC or federal Green Party right now. And honestly, I would not want to have anything to do because that is not me. The Green Party I built was the Green Party that recognized that every environmental challenge can be viewed through one of 2 lenses: the lens of hopelessness and despair and fear and anxiety, or the lens of the opportunity it can create for prosperity as we solve it. And climate change is no different. How are you, as an elected official who are just sitting there stoking the fires of anxiety, how are you helping? You're not. This is all about politics. It's ugly, and I don't like it. So I would be far more supportive of the BC Greens, and in particular and other parties, if they actually advocated for a solution. So what is their forestry solution? Nothing. And to me, you're abdicating your responsibility. If you are all you think you can do is stand up and stoke the fires of dissent. You're not governing. You're an activist. What you should be doing is saying, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to you too. You're not the same people. In fact, you don't even talk to each other, but I'm a decision maker. So I have to listen to both sides because I got to figure out solutions based on the input I'm getting. That is not the Green Party of today, in my view. What the Green Party of today is, they only hang out in the one side. And frankly, that's not the Liberal Party in BC of today either, because they hang out on the other side. And so if you want to advance public policy, you got to hang out and talk to both sides.
Andrew Weaver, always a great guest, always packs a punch on the Rumble Room. We appreciate him coming on. And he did mention he had a great working relationship with John Horgan. And, that shows that these very strong politicians and very strong personalities can get along as long as they don't get too dogmatic. And I think this dogmatic stuff, right, left, or upside down, is the great tragedy of modern politics. And you want to see our guys take a step back from that. Anyway, on that happy note, John, it's time to wrap things up again on the Rumble Room.
Such a great show. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, listeners and viewers. Again, we want to thank all of you for supporting the Rumble Room. We've jumped over 800,000 views. We are now working ourselves to 1 million. The show started about 2 years ago in March, upward and onward. If you want to follow us, comment on our program, here's a quick rundown of where you can find that. Facebook, Heart of the Show. Twitter, YouTube, where all of our shows reside. Then we have a series of Facebook groups, people interacting, commenting there. Twitter, and obviously, and not last but not least, TikTok. So once again, I'm your humble servant, Robin Adair. I'm the Croatian sensation, Johnny Jurisic.
Did you say you were Robin Adair?
No,
Are you trying to take my mantle from this show? You are John Jurisic, and I am Robin Adair, and rumble on.